The fight against insecurity has taken center stage this year due to the rise in kidnappings and killings in Nigeria. With federal government seeking solutions to fix the problem, states have also begun implementing measures to protect their indigents. The Zamfara state government has stepped up its war on insecurity as Governor Dauda Lawal on Wednesday formally unveiled the community protection guards designed to complement efforts of the regular security forces. A statement by the governor's spokesperson, Sulaiman Bala Idris, noted that the government was utilizing a multifaceted and multidimensional approach to addressing security challenges in the state. Zamfara is not the first state to implement such measures by setting up a local security outfit, as we have seen other states like Ondo that set up Amotekun, and also Benue State with the community volunteer guards. Is this new initiative by states to protect their indigents the way to go in order to solve the problem of insecurity? Joining us on the show to discuss this is Dr. Kabir Adamu, a security expert. Good morning, Dr. Adamu, and welcome to the morning show.
Thank you, Dr. Abatti. Good morning.
Well, very quickly, states are setting up, after a fashion, their own local security outfits. We have had Amotekun, we have had the Benue guards. Now Zamfara is setting up its own. When it is not states setting up their own teams, you have non-state groups like the Miyetti Allah Kautal Hore also setting up his own brigade of guards. Is this the way to go, as I stated in the introduction? And why are we here now? Kidnapping has gone up. Government says, no, we are not among the 10 worst countries in the world. So there's still hope. After all, we are not 10 of the worst. Should we just wait till we become the worst case for kidnapping in the world?
Dr. Abatti, I would like to start by saying the situation is dire, and we need to appreciate that fact that the situation is dire and that it needs a multifaceted, all of society and all of government approach. However, what are the realities on ground at the moment? The first reality is that our Constitution still has security in the exclusive list, which means only the federal government, as it were, has responsibility for security, even though there are some odd peculiarities within the Constitution. As an example, there are still provisions that allow for governors to receive the security vote. There are still provisions that allow the governors, as an example, to chair the State Security Council. And then the second reality is the fact that, as you know, I head a company called Beacon Security and Intelligence Limited. Now, we've documented at least 15 states that have passed legislation for the creation of their state-level security formation, in spite of the first element that I mentioned, that security remains in the exclusive list. So I believe that that's a constitutional lacuna. Perhaps constitutional lawyers would clarify to us how that is possible, but they've gone ahead, they've passed legislation, 15 states, and what we did is to document the number of these state-level security operatives. At the moment, we've been able to document about 50,000 of them. Now, the third reality is the fact that outside of these 15 states, there is virtually no out of the 774 local governments that we have in Nigeria that does not have one or the other form of vigilante or some form of security arrangements. In addition to these 774 local government security arrangements, you also have ethnic groupings that have formed themselves into ethnic militias, and that for all intents and purposes are also operating into what we've categorized as non-state armed groups who are not recognized by the state and who are operating, as it were. So that is the reality that we have on the ground at the moment. The fourth element is that our Constitution does provide for the possibility of the police, as an example, engaging with the state-level formations, train them, and engage them into the national security architecture. Unfortunately, in our analysis, we haven't seen enough of that. If we use Zamfara as an example, before the most recent launching by the governor, there used to be several state-level initiatives. Now, what we saw is that it was skewed towards a particular ethnic group. And because they were not properly trained by the police, they targeted the supposed ethnic group that was believed to be responsible for the crime activities in the state. And that created the monster that we have today in the country. So the consequence, because you did ask that in your question, the consequence of that is that we're increasingly securitizing Nigeria. The weapons proliferation challenge that we have in the country is increasing. And the more we allow these types of arrangements that are for all intents and purposes ad hoc to continue, the more this weapons challenge would continue. Now, added to that is the fact that we realize that we need an agency, a commission, to mop up small arms and light weapons. And in spite of the fact that we still don't have that commission, we're allowing weapons to proliferate more into the country. So in the long run, I don't think it will augur well for us. It's haphazard. There is no, at the moment, it will be very difficult for you to go to any of the security agencies, the Office of the National Security Advisor, the Inspector General of Police, to tell you to produce a comprehensive list of all of these state-level and local government vigilantes, and you will have it. It will also be very difficult for you to say, okay, produce all the operatives. Give me the profile of all the operatives that have been recruited. I don't think you will have it from any of the government agencies. So that's the danger that we have at the moment.
All right. All right, thank you, Dr. Mr. Adam, while I hear you, right, there's a challenge on our hands. And oftentimes, yes, as you've mentioned, security is under the remit of the federal government. However, state governments seem to be at their wit's end, and they want to protect their people. Hence, they resort into local vigilante groups, special security outfits that are not state security. In your estimation, whilst we wait for what is being proposed as a constitutional amendment, we know that's going to take a bit of time. How can the State Security Service work with, at least, because like you mentioned, there are so many of them now, we don't have a grasp of them. Those are some of the limitations or the challenges. Would you recommend perhaps an informal arrangement or some sort of structure whereby the police or security agencies are able to work with local vigilantes, so sort of register them so it's standardized, whilst we wait for a potential constitutional reform, which we do not know, or amendments, or which we do not know which way it would go, if state police would be voted for or against? Don't you think that at least something should be done? Because at this moment, we cannot begin to say, oh, do away with them, disband them. Can they work together?
Definitely. Like I hinted in my earlier remarks, there is a provision within the Police Act. As by virtues of the powers of that act, the police has the mandate to not only register, to support in where the Constitution allows it, the issuance of specific types of weapons to those types of groups, to train them so that they understand where their power starts and where it ends. I mean, as a citizen, you have the powers of arrest, but you do not have the power to prosecute. And I think this is the major danger that exists with the proliferation of these types of state-level and local or community-level groups. The inability to understand that their powers are limited, perhaps just to the gathering of intelligence, and maybe to sometimes the ability to detain or arrest, and then, of course, hand over to the more formal security agencies or departments for prosecution. What we've seen in the past and what is still ongoing is that they assume that power to prosecute, and is usually extrajudicial. And that is where the danger is. So I think the police needs to step in and act that provision within its mandate to make sure that when these groups are registered, I mean, Dr. Abatti referred to Mete Allah Kauta Hori, the infamous launching that happened in Nasarawa State. A military personnel was there in that launching. A police personnel was there in that launching. And it's clear that they did not do their due diligence to check whether that particular attempt was registered, that it had met the requirements of our law. But they honored the invitation, and of course, we've not been told whether the particular departments have done the right thing, that is to query them. Why did they attend such a function without checking to make sure that body was registered before they had attended? All we are told is that the person who did the launching has been arrested, but it's more than that. Like I said, the police was there, and several other government departments were there. So my point is, perhaps we should even start with a checklist. The police should develop a checklist of the requirements that any state, any local government, any arranged community gathering or registered body wants to launch that type of vigilante needs to meet before it launches it. And in that checklist, I hope to see elements around profiling, around the collection of biometrics, around the safeguards, including, for instance, guarantors of good standing that would ensure whoever it is that is enlisted as part of that arrangement meets the requisite requirement for what a good citizen, law-abiding citizen who is allowed to bear weapons of any type is enlisted. The second element is the role that not just the National Assembly, but the executive arm of government needs to play. We have a national security architecture. I know this word is bandied, but that security architecture has several provisions. So as an example, there is the provision for the National Security Council. There is the provision for the National Defense Council, the National Police Council. Now, all of these councils have their mandates spelled out clearly in the Constitution. And I believe that we don't need to recreate anything new. Let's even start from following the provisions of the Constitution. I'm a little bit worried that in spite of the dire circumstances that were in the National Security Council as it's meant to be constituted and convened. I'm sure Dr. Abatti knows what I'm talking about. It's yet to sit. We've seen ad hoc sittings of security personnel invited by the president, but that's not what the National Security Council is. It's meant to be convened properly. And then it has its administrative structure. So perhaps that's another thing that needs to be discussed extensively. Why are we not complying with the provisions of the Constitution vis-a-vis our national security architecture? The third point is the role of the National Assembly in all of this. I'm seeing a lot of knee-jerk reactions by the National Assembly. I think the National Assembly needs a wake-up call to realize that its role in checking the executive arm of government goes beyond invitations like what we're seeing at the moment. It goes beyond discussions around amending the Weapons Act. Studies have shown that in addressing issues like terrorism and even banditry, you need at least 80% of what we call the non-kinetic support for security, the kinetic component. And there is nobody in government that will play that role better than the National Assembly. If our education is improved, if infrastructure is improved, name them. No other arm of government can play that role better than the National Assembly. And the best way it can do that is to enhance its capacity for oversight. So I believe that the chairmen of the committees on security need to enhance their capacity for oversight function within the security sector. I honestly, with all sense of responsibility, do not think they're doing that adequately now. You just need to approach them and you understand what I'm talking about. So if all these three elements I've mentioned are followed through, I think it will be a good starting step for the immediate and short-term benefits of this state-level security arrangement. Yes, the police can work with them in gathering intelligence. The police can work with them in identifying criminal hotspots. The police can work with them in making sure that the granular approach to security that we seek to achieve is actually achieved in a very short time.
Okay, you talked about the National Assembly. The National Assembly has now invited security chiefs to appear before the Senate next week. And some of the phrases you have used on this program, they are the same phrases they are likely to go there and talk about. kinetic and non-kinetic. You talked about all society, all government approach. We have had that before. Is there a room in this conversation, in this whole dilemma, for new directions? Because the slogans are becoming too established. Security architecture, national security strategy, kinetic, non-kinetic, whatever. But at the end of the day, Nigerians are getting kidnapped. There's violence in the country. Everywhere is in turmoil. Are there new pathways? And if there are no new pathways, will you join some of us who keep saying that what we're dealing with is a failure of the state itself? How does the state self-correct?
Dr. Abatti, let me start by saying the fragility of the state is a fact. I wouldn't use the word failure, but that fragility. If you pick all the elements of a fragile state, social cohesion, corruption, political instability, name them, the fragility of our electoral processes, we've met all that criteria. So I am almost 100% certain that in terms of the fragility of the state, unfortunately, we're dealing with a challenge that we need to admit. Now, should we look at new areas? No. I want to make it very clear that I don't think we need any new thing. Let's comply with what the provisions within the security constitution for security. I talked about those councils that I referred to. We're not adhering to them as best as we can. And then how about the policies that we have? You referred to the revised National Security Strategy 2019. I can bet you that the implementation of that strategy is almost zero. And I say this with all sense of responsibility. It was launched in 2019. We were promised when it was launched that there's going to be a paradigm shift from the state-centric approach to the citizen-centered or human-centered security approach. Almost 5 years down the road, we're still in that state-centric approach. So clearly, we haven't moved forward with the implementation of that strategy. Pick up the national defense policy. What aspect of that policy is being implemented? Very little. So that is why I don't think we need any new approach. What rather we need to do is to introduce accountability elements within the security sector. Have monitoring and evaluation components, develop KPIs, and then make sure that where failure is observed. And earlier on, you showed on the screen a graph that my company developed. That graph, even to a primary school pupil, would show you clearly that we are not improving in the area of security. And if we are not improving, why is it that we still have the leadership still manning their positions? Why are we not seeing any changes? Why are we not seeing the type of discussions to say, okay, improve on your ability to meet the mandate for which you're heading a particular department or unit in office? Now that is how I think we should approach security. I referred not too long ago to the debacle regarding a minister that had to leave or was suspended from office because an allegation of fraud was made against her. Now, human lives are being lost. In December, in Plateau State, about 200 persons were killed. In FCT, according to the records in my company, about 71 to 72 persons have been abducted. Dr. Abatti, not a single person has been queried or held accountable for all of these infractions. Now, this is what we need to change. I don't think we need to introduce anything new. We need to implement more the provisions. We need to comply with those councils that exist within our constitution. And then it's also very important that the coordination that exists between the federal government and the state government, we need to see more coordination and cooperation between the two levels of government. We can bring in the local government, but I think that would open another vista of conversation, because of course the local government, as we all know, is not functioning as efficiently or effectively as it should be. If it were, then yes, we also need to bring it into that conversation. And I've been in circumstances where the conversation is actually, if we really not need to solve the security challenge, we need to make sure the local governments are effective and that they are operational. And then the economic circumstances in the country at the moment, there is a positive correlation between the deterioration in our economic circumstances and then the increase in security. Who looked...
No, please finish your thoughts as we round off.
All right, I wanted to say, who had a look recently at the statistics released by the Bureau of Statistics with regards to states and the inflation rate in them? Is it any surprising that Ekiti came tops? Is it any surprising that we're seeing what we're seeing in Ekiti at the moment? So we also need to take a very close look at the economic circumstances and then the positive correlation between that and then the rise in criminality across the states.
Well, important points established this morning. Thank you very much for your time with us, speaking on the state of security and also perhaps to explore state police in Nigeria. Thank you, Dr. Kabir Adamu.